Welcome to the Connor's Corner segment of Ask the Lawyer. With me right now is a previous guest who's been on the show before, Paul Weiss. He's a former president of the Civil War Roundtable, and we talked about the Civil War on a number of occasions. But today we're going to do a little something different. We're going to be talking about Paul's personal experiences in Vietnam. How you doing today, Paul?
Real fine, as long as the weather holds up, yes.
Okay, well, all right, so let's go back. You graduate from college. What happens?
Okay, well, I was in the University of Pittsburgh from 64 to 68, and back then there was a draft, so when I went to college, I knew I wanted to go into ROTC. I picked the school with ROTC because I figured you were going in, I would go in as an officer, and that was in 1964. Then in 1965, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, and Johnson started sending troops to Vietnam, so there was a lot more pressure on the draft and everything that. In fact, our ROTC unit at Pitt, it had when I joined in 64, it had a battalion, maybe 200 people. And by 66, it was tripled in size, three battalions. We had a brigade because of all the people who want to, in effect, avoid the draft and go through ROTC. So it was a big change there. And when I graduated in 68, when you get your diploma, you get your commission as a second lieutenant. And I was commissioned in the infantry. And a few months after that, I got my orders to go on active duty, and I went down to the infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia. That was the end of 1968.
What was infantry school like back then? I'm just curious.
IOBC, the Infantry Officer Basic Course. We had infantry officers, and we also had military intelligence officers who went through the same course. And they were from schools all over the country, and a few West Point cadets who had gone to graduate school, so they didn't go into the service with their classes. It was tough, but it was it was worthwhile. They kept us pretty busy for about 10, 12 weeks, and they tried to cover an awful lot of material during that time. And then, in fact, I remember when we first got Infantry Hall, which was a beautiful facility, much better than almost any college I've ever been in. And we big auditorium there, and we were greeted by the post commandant, Major General. He had been a prisoner of the Japanese during World War II, and he was a very soft-spoken man, unusual for most generals. And he says, the only advice I can give you is that you cooperate with each other. He says, we survived the prisoner of war camps by cooperating, and I always remember that. But they told us, says probably the question on your mind is if you're going to Vietnam. He says, there's no question, you are going to Vietnam. So that was for all of us who from active duty. We had some National Guard officers who weren't going, obviously. But it was very impressive instructors and a very impressive facility at Fort Benning. It was much better, actually. The instruction on whole was much better than the instruction I'd gotten in college, although the subjects was different, of course.
All right, so you graduate, and then what happens?
Well, I got assigned to the infantry school as an instructor for a few months. I was an assistant instructor. We had 2 or 3 day tactical problems. In fact, I still remember I was on the Special Operations Subcommittee of the Platoon Tactics Committee of the Company Operations Department, United States Army Infantry School, Fort Benning, Georgia, 31905. That sticks in my mind. And what we did, we went on 2 or 3 day tactical problems, and as an assistant instructor, the regular instructor would give them the classes and the instructions, and I would go out with one of the platoons and act as their advisor, depending on what kind of platoon it was. We had 3 different types of instructors. We had IOBC platoons, like I was, ROTC lieutenants. We had OCS platoons that were enlisted men becoming officers, and they had a new program there, instant E5s, they called it. We called them whip and chill or shake and bakes. They were private E1s, private E2s who would qualify on a test, and they would they would go to a 9-week course and become E5s, Sergeant E5s. So it was a new program because they were short of junior grade non-commissioned officers. So for the IOBC and the OCS officers, they would have their student platoon leaders. I would be their advisor, and for the NCO classes, I would be their platoon leader going through these 2 or 3 day tactical problems. So I learned a lot, but I also didn't learn to duck there because, I'm an instructor, nothing can happen to me. So there was a little bit of that. But after that, a few months there, I got my orders for Vietnam and went to I had a 30-day leave at home, and then I flew to Seattle and Fort Lewis, and we flew out of Seattle SeaTac Airport, and we took the northern route. We went to Fairbanks, Alaska, then we went to Yokota Air Force Base in Japan, and then to Vietnam. In Yokota, there was a huge hangar. There was a PX there, and we were mixing with other flights. We weren't the only flight there, and they announced the Freedom Bird flight. They called it the Freedom Bird flight. That was just the opposite of our flight. We were going to Vietnam. The Freedom Bird flight was returning to the States, so they announced their flight first, and they all yelled and screamed, "Yeah, yeah, yeah!" So you know what? To load their plane. And those of us on our flight, we're looking at each other. Oh, one more year, one more year. So,
well, you're at that age. A year's a long time.
It is. Yes, I was a little older when I went over there because I'd been to college. I was 23. So, anyway, we flew from Yokota. We went to Cam Bay, which was a big base, and I thought it was Vietnam smells very bad as a country. I'm sure it still does because of all the fertilizer they use in the rice paddies. So that was the first, you get assaulted by these noxious fumes when you land, and it was very warm. And what I noticed was in Cam Bay, they had guard towers 30 feet off the ground with sentries, but the sentries were using unloaded M14s. You could tell if an M14 is loaded because of the magazine. I said, well, this can't be too bad. I mean, they don't even give the guards loaded weapons. So I spent a couple of days in Cam Bay, and we got assigned units. And I was assigned to the 1st Brigade with the 5th Infantry Division, which was up on the DMZ, the northern end of the country, of South Vietnam. So we flew to Da Nang, which is further north, and a C-130. And then from Da Nang, I flew in a C-123, which is a smaller plane, 2-engine plane, to Quang Tri, where my unit was. And because of possible ground fire, the C-123 went into what they call a controlled crash landing, a very steep angle. Nobody was shooting at us, but just as a precaution, and landed at Quang Tri Airport. And I got out and I asked one of the Air Force sergeants to go looking for the latrine, and he said, "Well, sir, the piss tube is right around the corner over there." And I go, "Okay." And it was an artillery tube stuck in the ground at an angle with gravel at the bottom where you urinated in, and out in the open and everything. There was no women around at that time. So, I said, I'm not in Kansas anymore, so that was kind of the first introduction. I got assigned to the 1st Brigade was of the 5th Infantry. It was a separate brigade, and without going into too much detail, usually an Army brigade has maybe 3,500, 44,000 men if it's part of a division, but we were a separate brigade, so we needed our own support. So we had about 7,500 men. It was sent there in the northern part of the country because they were gradually withdrawing the 3rd Marine Division. And the 3rd Marine Division, they had 3 regiments, nine infantry battalions up there. We only had for everything, we had 4.5 or so battalions, but we were bigger battalions than the Marine battalions. And we had a tank battalion and a mechanized infantry battalion, and my battalion, which was what regular infantry, straight leg infantry, we called it. We didn't have our own vehicles. We were just walking kind of infantry, and we were the only ones who could be flown into an area because we had less equipment. So we were air mobile in effect, and they used us up in the high ground up there. But we had a big area to cover because I said we were taking over from the 3rd Marine Division. They had been there, since about from 65 to just before, they left just after I got there, actually a month or so after I got there. We were still supported by Marine Aviation for a while, and they weren't, I'm not saying they weren't good, they weren't reliable because they had other missions. And while I was there, we got assigned a platoon of UEs, of UH-1s from the 101st Division, which was just south of us on a regular basis, so they were much more reliable. And again, since we were the only unit that could be flown in helicopters, we didn't need a whole lot. Sometimes we needed a whole company, but most of the time, one platoon of 4 helicopters was enough to get us around and resupply missions. And let's see, I was the platoon leader I was going to take over for. He was due to be rotated back in about 3 weeks, so they put me with the recon platoon, which was 4 squads of 6 men, and their job was not to make contact with the enemy, but for reconnaissance and to look for areas where we might be deployed. So I Usually the platoon leader didn't go out with them. He would plan the missions. But since I was newbie and give me some experience, I went out with the squads, with the recon squads in the field. And that was okay. It was very educational, except the one time we got hit by a typhoon while we were out there. And we were the only ones out there. I'm sure the NVA were snug in their caves and everything. And it was a typhoon. And later I found out there was 23 inches of rain in 24 hours.
Ooh.
I'd been in rain before, obviously, but I'd never really been in rain before. And I still today I compare everything to that. I've been in storms that was as much rain fell down, but not constantly like that did for it was all day and all night. That was interesting. My hands were white and wrinkled from like you were in the bath too long. That was that was quite an experience. And then later I got assigned to my regular platoon. I was a platoon leader with B Company of the 1st Battalion, 11th Infantry. And we were very lucky. Looking back on it, we were very lucky. We were involved with stuff usually on the periphery. I mean, the main action was happening nearby, but not on us. So we were kind of lucky in that way. And it happened several times. So I guess it's a matter of luck.
Yeah.
It's like the one was the first operation I went on. There was a ridge, maybe 500 or 600 meters long. And there was NVA at the top of it. And I think there was supposed to be 50 or 60 of them. And I said we had a mech infantry battalion in our brigade and a tank battalion. So they had one company of the mech infantry. They had armored personnel carriers, M113s, that had mounted machine guns and aluminum armor. It could stop shrapnel and small arms, but anything 50 caliber and above would go through it. But they had them coming up the road that went up to the top of the ridge. And my company was deployed on the side of the ridge, the long side of the ridge, and we were coming up through the brush. It was kind of second growth stuff. It was kind of thick in spots, but we could get through it. Anyway, because the tracks, the APCs, we call them, the tracks, they made so much noise, they drew all the fire from the guys on the top of the ridge. So they called in airstrikes. And while we waited at the bottom, F-4 Phantoms came in, and the first one came in and was just firing its cannon. And as he pulled up with the bottom part of the plane facing the ground, the couple of guys from a couple of the NVAs popped out of their holes and started firing their AKs at him. So the second Phantom came in, same thing, and the same thing. A couple of guys popped out of the holes, and as soon as he finished shooting, they fired at him. And they must have called something else in. It was a delay, and then the third Phantom came in and dropped napalm on top of the ridge. And that was, it's illegal now, but that's great stuff.
When you say it's great stuff, what is napalm? I mean, I know, what does it do?
It's jelly gasoline, and it spreads out, and it'll burn to anything it attaches to, anything, whether animal, vegetable, or mineral. And it's very effective for people who are dug in against, they first used it against the Japanese in World War II. And they stopped using it after Vietnam, but it's great stuff. And we go up there, we call them crispy critters because they look like little dried up animal cracker things.
Mm-hmm. This is after they, get hit.
Blackened corpses, basically. So that we found about a dozen, maybe 15 up there. The rest maybe just fled down to the other side of the ridge where it was very thick. But I'm all for napalm. I mean, it keeps our casualties down.
Yeah, a lot of people may not realize it. I mean, yeah, it sounds like a terrible weapon, but what would you rather do, have American boys killed?
Right. I mean, it's the same stuff that's like in a flamethrower, the same idea, except it's on a grander scale. And it's very effective. And it's because the planes come in very low, it's very easy for them to hit the target. So it doesn't cause too many. I mean, there's not collateral damage on that. At least out in the woods. I wouldn't want to use it in a city so much, but out in the woods it was effective. Anyway, we had, and then I'm saying we were kind of involved in situations like that where things were happening, but we didn't get the brunt of it. There was we had another instance. We were spread out. Our companies were spread out 5 or 6 meters apart. 5 or 600 meters apart. And our other company, I was in B Company. One of our other companies, Charlie Company, started taking they got hit by an attack, and we had people sneaking around our perimeter, but we blew off a couple of our Claymore mines, but we didn't have any real action on our side. But they got hit hard, and what I remember about that is they had the C-130, the gunships, that was called Spooky. They had 20 millimeter cannons and Gatling guns, and they were circling around Charlie Company, and it was like this was at nighttime, and a stream of blue tracers were going down there. It was like a river from the plane down to the ground, and they broke up that attack pretty good. But I said we were lucky. We got a sideline, a good view of it, but we didn't have too much action on our side. And looking back on it, I said it's a good thing.
Right. Let me ask you, what was your relationship to your men?
Well, it was pretty good. They wanted to know whether you were a jerk or not. The guy I took over for was very good, and they gave me a week or so before they made the judgment on me. When they saw I wasn't a crazy guy who was trying to get them killed for personal glory, then everything was copacetic. It was interesting when I joined the unit. We had I won't mention his name. He was a little bit of an oddball as a company commander, and I didn't know anything, so I was just doing what he told me to do. We were walking up and down. We were up on the DMZ, where the old the dividing line between North and South Vietnam was, and we were up on the trails up there. And if you ran into something up there, it was battalions. It wasn't just little groups of VC. It was battalions of NVA. And he was walking us up and down the trails, and we were fully loaded with packs. Everybody's carrying 60, 70 pounds at least. And we were doing 15, 20 kilometers a day, which was and up and down these hills. They weren't super highways. And my guys were pissed off at this, and they're telling me, "Hey, LT, call me LT, you got to do something about this guy, or we will." They weren't going to do that. But anyway, fortunately for us, we got hit by mortars one night, and he got slightly wounded. He was wounded in the leg, but he couldn't walk, so they had to evacuate him. And the man they flew in to replace him, Captain Iacoboni, he was a real good dude. He knew what he was doing, and he was very competent. So it got better after that, and my guys didn't complain about him, so I guess he was okay. But it was a little odd. Well, the average age for the Vietnam, somebody in Vietnam was 19, as opposed in World War II was 23. So the difference between being 23 and 19 is quite a bit. I said I was older because I've been to college. There was only one other guy in the platoon who was older than I was. We called him Pops, and he was 27. So he'd been in the Carney for years. So they were all young guys, but they were all hard chargers. I mean, maybe 1/3 of them was draftees, and 2/3 were enlisted. But when they got into action, I had to hold them back. It was hard to hold them back. They became tigers. They wanted to, they really wanted to do something that sometimes it wasn't a safe thing to do or the right thing to do. We took prisoners a couple of times, especially one time, and they wanted to shoot the prisoners right there. And I said, no, we're not doing that. There's no operational necessity to do that. They may have information, and we got them back to the rear. But their blood's up. They see friends of theirs get hurt. They want to do something. So I had no problems with them, except for one guy, which is a long story. He decided he was a conscientious objector, and he pissed everybody off. I'm not going to go into that now. That's a long story.
Well, you had a lot of support back in the States then. When did you feel that the political situation changed dramatically in the States?
I was there. I wasn't involved. We weren't involved in the Cambodian thing in May of 1970. But I was there when that was going on. And you noticed the change in the newspapers and everything, the Stars and Stripes even. It was the Cambodian thing because I was over there. I wasn't really involved with watching the news or anything. But I know Nixon had to defend why he was going into Cambodia and all that. I think that was kind of a change there, at least that I noticed. And May of 1970. So
I have one last question for you. In retrospect, you mentioned 1/3 of the guys were draftees. Do you think the draft was good for the U.S. military and the United States in general? Bad? Should we have a draft today?
Like everything is advantages and disadvantages. It gets people in there, and it forces people to do something maybe they wouldn't, and which is good. You associate with all different kinds of people, and you learn things you wouldn't necessarily learn. But if a draft is 2 years, it takes a long time to train somebody to be a competent soldier. And the time you train him, he's just about ready to leave. So in that respect, it's not a good thing. If you just have somebody trained and and on active duty for a while, it's going to cost an awful lot of money to keep replacing these people back and forth. So it's kind of a cost benefit thing. It's good in a way, but in a way it's not, because you're spending a lot of resources training people who are not going to be there very long.
What about to the individuals? Do you think it was good? You think it was good for those guys?
I think it would be a good thing to force them to do something. I said they would out of their comfort zone. I mean, you get the drill sergeants in your face, you're going to be a different person after that, no matter who you are.
No, I agree. I think it was one of the best things that ever happened to me is having that drill sergeant in your face. You never look at life quite the same after that, and you can deal with a lot more troubles.
Exactly. For the individual, it's a good thing. But as far as the cost to the military, it's really not a cost benefit. It's a good thing for them.
All right. Well, thank you, Paul Weiss, Vietnam War veteran, former president of Civil War Roundtable. Thank you for being on Connor's Corner.
Okay, and always a veteran. Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, take care, Paul.